Hey, Jimmy, how are you?
Hi, good afternoon.
Well, I'm so happy that you were able to join me today. We can have this conversation, so I appreciate it.
I'm humbled by the request, so thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, yes. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself so everybody can kind of know who you are, and then we'll start with the Q&As.
Oh, wow. I don't know what time. Well, I'm Jimmy Greene. I'm the CEO and president for Associated Builders and Contractors in Michigan. And my primary job, obviously, is political affairs and government affairs and public policy for builders and contractors throughout the state of Michigan and across the nation.
Awesome, awesome. And you do so much more, but you're being modest. But that's you
Oh,
do a lot.
wow.
You do a lot in the community.
That's my
So
job. That's my job.
yes. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the questions. So my
Sure.
first question for you is, what's something you wish you would have known at the beginning of your career?
Oh, wow. I think for me, it's always been, and I try to teach a lot of the folks I mentee, that it really isn't about who you know. It's really about who knows you.
Mm,
Had I known that sooner than later, I would have spent a lot more time trying to be in a room with people who would get to know me. I think
mm,
sometimes, we're in the proximity of people who may not necessarily, I mean, they might be important, but they're not necessarily the people who can advance you. And so I would have right off the gate, I would have been more predisposed to be in rooms where people would really get a chance to know me, like I knew them. And I always
mm.
laugh because I always say, like I know Oprah Winfrey, but Oprah Winfrey doesn't know me. And so,
Exactly.
the idea, that old adage that it's who you know, I think is a unwise metaphor that people use, and probably they could flip that around. So I wish I had known that sooner, but I certainly get it now more than ever.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for sharing that because I never really thought about it that way, but it's really true. I mean, because
Hmm.
we do hear that all the time.
Yep.
It's who you know, it's who you know, and you can know tons of people, and if they don't know anything about you, or
Yep.
kind of witness your work or your walk and what you do, and kind of
Right.
how you contribute to the community
Hmm.
or society, then I mean, really, it doesn't matter that you know.
Yeah, I said, and I said that to somebody the other day. I actually put it on Facebook, and I said, the job you want isn't the resume you send out. The people who want you already know your resume. They already
Mhm.
know it. They don't need to see it. They know it because that's your body of work, and word
Yeah.
travels fast, and in the professional ranks in particular.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. Thanks for sharing that. I like that. My second question for you is, what's one thing you would tell your younger self?
Not to be afraid, not to be afraid to take chances. Don't be afraid of your life. It's a big, vast world out there. And sometimes we think that the one thing we do is the only thing we'll do. And so you
Mm,
wind up locking yourself into these positions that in many respects kind of stunt your growth and creativity. So I would say trust yourself. If I'm talking to my younger self, it's like, Jimmy, you know what you're capable of. Trust that. Don't allow anybody else to validate that. You already know what you know, and then what you don't know, go learn it.
yeah,
That's what I would tell my younger self. Don't
yeah,
be caught in this little box that people put you in. And more importantly, it's a box that people put you in, but the worst part is it's the box you stay in. I don't
yes,
mind people putting me in a box, but the fact that you can't collapse that box and move out of it is more problematic than anything.
yeah. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And we put ourselves in these boxes as well.
Oh
But
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, I really, really agree with you about people will put you in boxes, and they will limit you. I always tell people, don't put your limitations on me. What you
Yeah.
may be afraid to do or what you don't think that I'm capable of doing, I don't have to receive that. And I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I haven't
Don't
been in a
receive-
box in a long time
Yeah, me.
for a lot of reasons too.
Yeah.
I don't think I think most people find people like me a little kind of an enigma,
Mhm.
because they see you and then you shift or change, but that means you're evolving and growing. And
Yes.
so that tends to wind up disrupting them more so than me. Like I
Yes.
embrace it. I love the idea that what I once knew I don't know now, or what I thought
Yes.
was true isn't anymore. And so that box can be crippling in many ways than one.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you said that because I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, it's like I always tell people, if you're the same exact person that you were 20 years ago, what have you been doing?
Hmm.
We have to constantly
Right.
grow and evolve, and I'm not
Hmm.
saying you have to just change your whole being, but should be something in you, like you said, that you grow and you learn and you evolve. You maybe embrace some things that you didn't think about before. Just try something new and
Yeah.
grow in that.
And it's fun. It really
Yeah.
is. I mean, it's really fun. I think one of the great attributes I probably have, and sometimes it's important to really, if you're going to be really critical of yourself, and I am, I think it's important to recognize your positive attributes as well too. And mine is this great ability to be wrong. Like I just have no reservations about being wrong.
Yeah.
And I love that about me. I really do. I think
Yeah.
it's a trait that I appreciate about me more and more. Like, whoa, I'm sorry, and even now when I'm wrong, I publicly say that, where even if I put a Facebook post out and somebody questions or discounts what I've said, I make it a point to go back in, and not in that post, but in a whole new post, and say, hey, I apologize. I had some information that was wrong. And I hope it gives people permission to be wrong, because I think that's how we all grow.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And if you're not afraid to be wrong or to hear the
Hmm.
word no, you will take more chances. You will
Yeah.
try things because you're not afraid of. I think a lot of times people don't try things or venture out to new things because they are afraid of that rejection part of it. And if you don't see it that way, you say, "Hey, I was wrong," or
Yeah.
whatever. You can go on with your life.
Well, that's funny having this conversation. I'd almost go back to your question about what would I tell my younger self, and I'd
Yeah,
answer it with, "Don't be afraid to be wrong." There's so
yeah,
many things you could tell your younger self, but
I
that's
know.
certainly one of them right there too. Is just don't be afraid to be wrong. Grow.
Yeah, yeah. Keep growing. Yes,
Yep.
I love that. I love that. So share a moment that changed you in some way.
Oh wow, I have so many defining moments in my life. I think the biggest one, the one that I was cognizant of, when I mean I was in that moment where I knew that it was going to change my life, and it was the day I stood on the funeral home steps. My sister had been murdered at
Mm,
18. She was 18. Well, she hadn't turned 18 yet, in Flint, and I was full of rage, and there was just so much boiling inside of me. I was 20 years old, and the world just seemed like so small at that time. And I was filled with all this hate and anger, coming out of Flint, because I didn't want to go back into Flint. And when I
yeah,
go in, here's my sister murdered. And I knew then that if I stayed in Flint, it would ultimately be the decline of the rest of my life. I would wind up being that kind of Flint. And I
yeah,
love my hometown, don't get me wrong, but at the time, it was a dark and really terrible time. And I knew that I had to leave. I knew that I couldn't come back to Flint
mhm.
because of what it did to me and how I felt. So
Sure.
I made a cognizant decision at that point, right on that funeral step home, that I was going to leave Flint and never come back.
Oh,
And
wow.
that it changed me
Yeah,
considerably.
yeah. Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Well, it
You
put me in
know
Saginaw, and I always say Flint was the place I was born, and
yeah,
Saginaw is the place I grew up in. So,
okay.
there's a big difference between the two. I felt like I came of age in Saginaw, and I don't think I know I wouldn't have had the same evolution and the same growth, the same success, met the same people, people who really impacted my life considerably. That never would have happened had I acted out on that anger and stayed in Flint. It would have been a whole different Jimmy Greene.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
I said then, because my sister was buried, and my family was embarrassed about her because she had turned to prostitution after a life of drugs, and even at a
mhm,
young age, and they kept the E off the end of her name. It's something that people who
mhm,
know me very intimately know, that I don't let anybody misspell my name. I immediately correct them if they
yeah.
leave the E off the end of Greene, because I said when I left that funeral home that I was going to make my name count for my sister, and that I
Oh,
was going to put the E back on the end of her name. And so that
oh,
I set out to do that. And so,
mm,
when people say, now when they spell my name Green, I make it a point. People think I'm being an ass about it, but I'm not. I don't think
yeah,
they truly understand how powerful that E means to me and what it means to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Uh, and so you had a guest on last week, Kevin Kendrick, and
yeah,
Kevin Kendrick had me at a Rotary Club
mhm,
meeting one day, and he knew a little bit of my story. And I actually told this story for the very first time publicly,
Mm.
because I wasn't ashamed of my sister. And it was a really great time for me to talk in front of some Midland elites, people who were very important. It was important for me to show them that, the stuff you are bringing me up to talk about is just what I do, but it isn't who I am. Who I am is my sister. And
Yeah.
so that was a pretty powerful time for me.
Oh, yeah, that really, ooh, that made me a bit emotional because I just, I get really emotional, but I just think about how, people do have different shame and different things like that. And,
Hmm.
that's their thing. And there's nothing wrong with them feeling that way. They
Right.
feel that way. But I really like how you talked about how you decided to honor her despite everything else, because we all have stuff, right? We all
Hmm.
have stuff that, or I know for myself that, if it wasn't for, an inner voice or, a village around me, I could have made different decisions in my life, to take me one direction and instead of the other, So I
Hmm.
want to judge people for their choices in life. But I really like how you talked about how you decided to honor her, despite everything else or what people said was
Oh,
wrong.
yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate
Hmm.
that.
Sure.
So, and you kind of touched on this question a little bit. But how have you intentionally showed up and helped to bring change in the
Oh,
world?
I am not an accident. So I think when you look at all the things I've done and all the community activism or participation or boards I've served on, anything that has anything to do with the betterment of a community, I've served, but it's intentional. So when you look at my work for Underground Railroad or Shelter House, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, anything that impacts children, anything that impacts domestic abuse, anything. That's how I grew up. Drug intervention. I don't do the kind of things that a lot of other people do if I don't feel a vested interest or an empathy in.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
for me, I've never done anything or volunteered on anything I was sympathetic to, but I've donated a great deal of time to things I was empathetic to. So
Mhm.
that's the pattern of my volunteerism and my community involvement. It is empathy. I serve because it'll ultimately change the world that I wish my sister grew up in. And
Mm.
so that for me was, in many respects, a way for me to keep her alive by ensuring that there are fewer Tracy Greenes in the world, and especially with the E off the end of their name, and more opportunities for young women in particular, or kids of abuse. And I was abused as a child as well. Um, to have a healthy and vibrant childhood, that was something I lacked. I didn't have that. And
Yeah.
so I tend to stay very actively involved in causes like that. And so to me, the world is too big. I went to a symposium one time and they were talking about how big the world is. And then they made the idea that if you could just take the best ideas and make the world a zip code, you can really affect the world. So for me, I've always made the world a zip code. And then you feel
Mhm.
like you really are changing the world, because I think good things and good ideas bleed out to other zip codes. And so that's
Yeah.
always been my own personal mantra.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I really like too how you speak about, again, honor your sister and trying to make a change for someone else. So often we stay in our past places, right? As opposed to saying,
Hmm.
okay, how can I take that experience and help someone else's be better?
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
staying where I was, because I think that's where you get into that toxic mindset. If you stay there, you can use that as a tool to help, your life,
Mhm.
of course, be better, and someone else's that possibly could be going through that as well.
Yeah. There are other decisions you make that become sort of stools to that, legs to that stool. Like, for example, it's funny. People know my personality. I've never drank. So I've never drank,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is interesting because, I usually don't have an excuse for my behavior, because people know I'm sober and I meant what I said. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a
Yeah.
bad thing. But no, really, I've never drank. I always felt like I would ultimately. I was afraid I had this obsessive compulsive thing.
Yes.
Pardon me. And I was, because my
You're
mother and father are alcoholics,
Mhm.
and I was afraid that if I drank, I would like it, and then if I liked it, I would become it. And so I
Mm.
had this discipline right out. How, where you get it from, through a lot of pain, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but I developed this keen discipline never to drink. And my fraternity brothers, when I went to school, but I mean, that became a test for them, a challenge for them to try to get me to drink. But
Hmm.
they had no idea. I used to always say in my mind when they would hit me when we were pledging, I'd always say my mother hit harder than that in my mind. So I'd always block that stuff out.
Yeah.
But I
Wow.
was really repulsed by the smell, by the
Yeah.
smell of alcohol, because it took me back, to a period of time that was really god awful for me.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
little things that happen that become really big things and powerful things in your life. And then you look back and you go, oh, that's what that meant. I don't think you'd know it at the time. You're just trying to survive. You're just trying to not be what you were, and
Yes.
trying to just gain traction forward, a step at a time.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Very, very true. Very, very true. So my last question for you is, if you had some words of encouragement to leave with us, what would they be?
Wow.
I
I
mean, you've given
think
so many.
for me, it's always been transparency. I think
Yes.
what we've failed to do of late anyway is not have the courage to be transparent. I know because I know so many people who've had pain in their life, who've had family members suffer through drug abuse or abuse, or I mean, there's a lot of hidden dysfunction in the world, and we keep impressing upon people that somehow you're supposed to be perfect, and we do that by putting on perfect faces. I don't do that. It's important for people to understand, okay, that's nice, you like what I've done. That's not who I am. I come from a lot of dysfunction. I come from a lot of mistakes. I want you to know that I want you to compliment me, that not for what I've done, but what I've come through to do what I've done. So,
Exactly.
don't say, oh my God, he's a great community person. I want you to say, oh, he's a great community person, but look what he had to come through in order to get there,
Yeah.
dysfunction and abuse. And because that transparency helps people understand that we all have worse moments, but they don't
Yeah.
become worse days or worse weeks or years. Have condensed them down to moments, and then use them by the courage to say, hey, you know what, I screwed up, or I'm not perfect. And then use that to just almost gain that traction to say, but I'm going to be better. I'm not who I was. I'm never going to be who I used to be. And every day is a new opportunity to be something different. And part of that is just and it's healing. Like when
It
you say,
is.
a lot of people now, when they say things like like they say things about me, if you talk to Janae Velasquez or Kevin Kendrick, and somebody say, oh, hey, did you ever hear Jimmy Greene was abused? And they'd go, oh, I already knew that. See, that that transparency is
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
liberating,
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
not worried about something catching up to you, because hell, you already told the world. So,
Exactly.
and it feels good to just say, yeah, life wasn't perfect, but boy, and I'm not perfect, but I love the journey trying to get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's my thing. That try to be perfect. That's fun. We'll never get there, but man, the journey's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
that would be my word of encouragement to folks, is not be afraid. And I said this earlier, don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to take risks. Have some fun with it. Make mistakes, admit them. And then more importantly, be transparent about it, because the rest of the world's looking, and everybody needs a little bit of guidance, a little bit of leadership, and more importantly, a lot of courage. And I think it's people like us that help them get there.
Yeah. No, I love that, Jimmy, because I love the transparency part. I love the fact that it's okay for us to admit that we're human, and that, things happen and we
Mhm.
have human experiences. And I think too, like you said, the people that you mentor, or people that are in, around you within your circle, your children, whoever, when they see that, okay, this is what I went through, but look where I am now. That's the part, because I used to speak at Shelter House whenever they had like new
Mhm.
ladies come in, because I came from a abusive relationship, and I would always talk to them, and I said, I want to talk to you guys about not just all of what I went through. Yes, let's talk about that too, but I want you all to see that you don't have to stay there.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can move on from that and actually have some joy and freedom and excitement and love. Because I think that's a good balance to be able to show that. So I appreciate you for saying that part
Well,
as
I had a nun. I had a nun say to me one time that God didn't make perfect people, and I thought to myself, well, heck, I don't want to disappoint him then.
well.
So,
All right.
like, I don't want to blow that experiment. So let me
Right.
just stay in my imperfect world.
That's right. That's right. No, I love it. Thank you, Jimmy, for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I love transparency. I love that. I think we all need that. I think people need because there's so many people struggling. We have so
Yeah.
many people that you have no idea what they're going through
Hmm.
right now, and a
Yeah.
lot of times it's so much pressure to feel like you have to be perfect, right? And have these little images. And that's why oftentimes, I come in and I'm like, just myself. And I'm like, look, I can't, it's too exhausting for one to
Hmm.
try to be something else. So I just
Yeah.
say, this is who I am, and
Yeah.
uh,
The real key is don't have a blind spot to your imperfections.
yes, I
That's the
like
real
that.
key right there. We're
Yeah,
all imperfect, but know them,
yes,
understand them, and some we get past, some we don't. We just are who we are. But
yeah,
don't have a blind spot to them. That creates a whole different kind of person there.
yes, yes, yes. Well, thank you, Jimmy. You got to write a book.
Facebook is my book. Whenever I got something to say, I just put it out.
You just said that. Yes,
Yeah.
I see. No, I know. Well, thank you again, Jimmy, for taking the time. I
You're
truly
welcome. Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much. I appreciate
Yes.
it. I'm humbled by the request. I really am.
Oh,
Seriously. Thank you.
no, I really appreciate you. And I really loved when you came on the live show. I love how you don't mind saying the truth of what you feel. I really appreciate people like that and value that. So thank you.
Well, thank you too. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, to you too. Enjoy it.
All right. I remember my lesson. Don't be bringing the old stuff in the new year. Don't call it a Happy New Year.
I saw that. I like that. So go ahead and tell everybody what you say.
Don't be bringing the old stuff in, man.
And say Happy New Year. You have to really make it a new year.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes. That's a good thing to close on. Thank you,
Thank
Jimmy. I
you.
appreciate you. All right.
Happy New
Take
Year.
care.
All right.
You too. Bye.